I want you to try a little thought experiment with me to kick things off today. Close your eyes and just picture a farmer.
Okay, picturing a farmer.
Right, so go back, say, 5,000 years, ancient Egypt. You've got a guy with a stick, scratching the dirt, throwing some seeds down, and, praying for rain. Got it.
Got it. It's a very classic image.
Okay, now I want you to fast forward. Go to Rome at the height of the empire, then jump to the Middle Ages in England, then jump again to, like, France in the 1600s. What does the farmer look like now?
Well, honestly, he looks exactly the same.
Right.
He's still holding a stick, he's still walking behind an ox, and he is definitely still praying for rain.
And that is the wild part to me. For about 12,000 years, from the moment humans first figured out that seeds make plants, until surprisingly recently, the technology of feeding ourselves just barely budged.
It really didn't.
A peasant in 1650 was basically doing the exact same job as his ancestor in 3000 BC.
It's a staggering stagnation when you really think about it. I mean, we built the pyramids, we invented philosophy, we charted the stars, but we were still harvesting wheat by hacking at it with a curved knife.
And then boom, in the blink of a historical eye, everything just changes. We go from hand-scattering seeds to these massive mechanical monsters, super cows that are double the size of their ancestors, and this population explosion that completely rewrites the map of the human race.
And that explosion is exactly what we are unpacking today. We're looking at the second agricultural revolution.
Which I know agricultural revolution sounds like a chapter in a textbook you probably slept through in high school.
Oh, most people definitely did. But the material we're doing a deep dive into today, specifically looking at AP Human Geography, topic 5.4, mechanization and the second agricultural revolution, it argues that this isn't just about farming.
No, not at all.
This is the origin story of the modern world. The stakes are huge here. Without this specific shift, there are no skyscrapers, there's no internet, no sprawling cities. We would have never escaped the starvation traps that economists like Thomas Malthus warned us about.
That is a really big claim. You're saying the iPhone essentially exists because some guy in the 1700s figured out a better way to plant turnips.
I am saying exactly that. It's a direct line. You really don't get Silicon Valley without the seed drill.
Okay, I am fully listening. So our mission today is to connect those dots for you. We're going to cover the gadgets, so the mechanization, the science, like the breeding and crop rotation, and the massive human migration that followed.
Right. The roadmap is basically looking at the three big gears that started turning all at once.
Let's start with the timing then. You said we waited 12,000 years. Why did the dam break in the 18th century? What was the actual spark?
The spark was the Industrial Revolution. But it's not quite as simple as just saying, factories made tractors. It's a feedback loop. And this is really key to understanding economic development in this whole era.
So it's a chicken and egg situation.
Exactly. Think about it. The industrial sector, the factories, the ironworks, they needed workers. But you can't have workers in a factory if everyone is stuck out in a field trying to grow enough wheat just to stay alive.
Right. If it takes 10 people to feed 10 people, nobody can go build a steam engine.
Precisely. You're trapped in subsistence farming. So agriculture had to get more efficient to release those workers. But at the very same time, those new factories started producing the high-quality steel and the precision tools that allowed agriculture to get efficient in the first place.
So the farm feeds the factory, and the factory equips the farm.
They climbed the ladder together. And the first rung of that ladder was mechanization. We stopped using muscle and we started using iron and gears.
Which brings us to the rise of the machines part of the story. Going from hand tools like the scythe to actual equipment. And we have to talk about Jethro Tull.
And not the band.
Yeah, every time I see the name, I just hear a flute solo. But this Jethro Tull was an agricultural pioneer. And according to the sources, he looked at the way farmers were planting seeds and basically said, you guys are doing this all wrong.
He really wasn't wrong, though. Before Tull, the standard practice was something called broadcasting.
Which sounds like a media term, but I'm guessing he wasn't starting a radio show.
No. Broadcasting literally means casting broadly.
Yeah.
You take a sack of seeds, walk out into the field, and just throw handfuls of grain in a wide, sweeping motion.
That sounds incredibly imprecise.
It was chaotic. Just think about the physics of it.
Yeah.
Some seeds land right on top of the soil and get eaten by birds immediately. Some just blow away in the wind. Some land in a big clump and end up fighting each other for nutrients.
So you're throwing away food before it even grows.
It was incredibly wasteful. So Tull invents the seed drill.
I've seen diagrams of this thing. It basically looks like a little cart you pull behind a horse.
It's deceptively simple. It digs a small trench, drops a seed at a very specific depth, covers it back up with dirt, and moves on. But the real game changer wasn't just saving the seeds. It was the fact that it planted everything in perfectly straight rows.
Why does a straight row matter so much, though? Is it just an aesthetic thing?
Oh no, it's totally operational. If you scatter seeds randomly, the field is a mess. You can't walk through it without crushing the plants. But if you plant in straight rows, you can walk between the crops.
Which means you can easily distinguish between the crops and the weeds.
Exactly. You can get in there with a hoe or eventually a machine and kill the weeds without hurting the actual food. That one change allowed farmers to actively manage the field while the crop was growing, rather than just throwing seeds and hoping for the best.
Okay, so we're planting smarter, but then comes harvest time, and this seems like the biggest bottleneck. I mean, growing wheat is fine, but cutting it down by hand sounds like an absolute nightmare.
It was backbreaking labor. You're using a sickle or a scythe, that long curved blade the Grim Reaper carries. You have to physically grab a handful of stalks, slice them, and stack them. You could have the best growing season in human history, but if you couldn't harvest it before the winter rains came, it would just rot in the field.
You're entirely limited by human speed.
Right, until the mechanical reaper comes along.
Ah.
Cyrus McCormick gets a lot of the credit here. This machine completely mechanized the cutting and bundling of grain.
The stats on this are just bananas. I was looking at the comparison numbers. The Reaper increased harvesting efficiency tenfold compared to manual labor.
Tenfold is actually a conservative estimate in some cases. Think about what that practically means for a farmer. Is the difference between harvesting 1 acre a day and 10 acres a day.
It completely changes the math of farming. We're talking about doing in hours what used to take days.
Completely. Suddenly, a single family can manage a piece of land that used to require a whole village to harvest. You stop farming just to survive, and you start farming to sell the surplus. That is the massive shift from subsistence to commercial agriculture.
And we can't forget the steel plow in this lineup. This is the big John Deere name drop.
Right, and this one is really important because of the geography involved. As settlers moved into the American Midwest, which is now the breadbasket of the world, they hit a major problem. The soil there is incredibly rich, but it's heavy and sticky.
It's like glue.
Yeah, exactly like glue. The old cast iron plows they brought from Europe would just get stuck. You'd have to stop every 10 feet and scrape the heavy mud off the blade. It was maddening. John Deere basically polished a steel saw blade and turned it into a plow. It was slick enough that it cut through that sticky prairie soil like butter.
So it was a precursor to modern combines, allowing for real, efficient soil preparation. It basically unlocked the Midwest.
It really did. It turned millions of acres of supposedly unusable land into the most productive farmland on Earth. And then you add in threshing machines to efficiently separate the grain from the stalks and husks, and the whole system is just humming.
So we have the drill, the reaper, the plow, the thresher. We are producing way more food with way less effort. But the hardware is really only half the story here. We need to talk about the techniques and the biology. Smarter, not just harder.
This is the point where farmers really started acting like scientists.
The big concept here from the sources is the four-field system, or crop rotation, which sounds a bit dry, but I was reading about the old way leaving fields fallow, and it just seems crazy to me. Can you explain why leaving a field fallow was the standard for so long?
It was necessary evil.
Yeah.
Crops like wheat are very hungry.
Yeah.
They suck nutrients, specifically nitrogen, right out of the soil. If you plant wheat in the same exact spot 3 years in a row, the soil dies. It has nothing left to give.
So the historical solution was just to stop planting?
Yes. You would leave the field empty or fallow. You let the weeds grow. You let nature slowly repair the damage over a year or two. But that means at any given time, a huge chunk of your land, maybe a third, maybe half, is producing zero food. You're paying taxes on land that is doing absolutely nothing.
It's like owning a massive factory and shutting down half the assembly line every year just to let the machines rest.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's incredibly inefficient. The big innovation was realizing that you didn't have to leave it empty to recover. You just had to systematically change what you planted.
Enter the turnip.
The humble turnip. And clover. This is where the chemistry really comes in. Wheat takes nitrogen out of the soil. But legumes like clover, beans, peas, and root crops like turnips, they do something magical. They fix nitrogen.
Fixed sounds like they're repairing it.
They are repairing it. They literally pull nitrogen from the air and lock it down into the soil through their roots.
Mm-hmm.
So the four-field system was a strict rotation. Year 1, you plant wheat, which you eat. Year 2, turnips. Year 3, barley. Year 4, clover.
So you are continuously producing something, but the soil never gets exhausted because the turnips and clover are basically recharging the battery.
Right. But here is the kicker. Humans don't really want to eat that many turnips. And we definitely do not eat clover.
I was going to say, a diet of 50% clover sounds pretty miserable.
But so who eats it?
The livestock, the cows and sheep.
Exactly. And this solved another massive historical problem. Before this, keeping farm animals alive through the winter was incredibly hard. There just wasn't enough grass. You usually had to slaughter a big chunk of your herd in the autumn and salt the meat because you simply couldn't feed them in January.
But now you have barns packed full of turnips and clover.
Exactly. Now you can keep a huge herd alive year-round. You have fresh meat in the winter. You have milk, cheese, and leather all year. And, crucially, you have way more manure to fertilize those wheat fields. It becomes this perfect self-sustaining circle.
And because you have these herds year-round, you can start messing with their genetics. This brings us to the super cow era, selective breeding.
Right, it sounds so obvious to us now, but for a long time, livestock breeding was basically random. Whatever bull jumped the fence got the job done.
Romance was dead, but efficiency was born.
Robert Bakewell is the classic name to know here. He started intentionally breeding only his biggest, fastest-growing animals, and the results were almost cartoonish. Take the shorthorn cattle, for example. Better quality meat and a massive increase in milk production.
I saw a stat about sheep in the source material that blew my mind. In the early 1700s, the average sheep sold for meat weighed something like 28 pounds. By the late 1700s, it was 80 pounds.
That's nearly triple the size in a relatively short window. Imagine if your car suddenly got 3 times faster over one generation. That's the level of biological hacking we're talking about here. We were designing animals to be literal food factories. Combine that with better land management, like draining swamps and using irrigation to reclaim unusable land, and production just skyrockets.
Okay, so let's take stock of where we are. We have machines doing the work of 10 men. We have soil that never sleeps. We have triple-sized sheep. We are swimming in food. But there is a huge logistics problem with producing massive amounts of food. It rots.
This brings us to the distribution revolution. Because you can grow a literal mountain of wheat in Kansas, but if you can't get it to New York before it spoils, it's totally worthless.
And this is where we have to talk about Thomas Malthus, the ultimate party pooper of the 18th century.
Poor Malthus. He was an economist who looked at the charts and panicked. He saw that the human population was growing exponentially, doubling and doubling again. But food production, historically, that only grew in a straight arithmetic line. You add a new field, you get a little more corn.
So he did the math and said, we are all going to starve.
He called it a Malthusian catastrophe. He basically predicted that humanity would breed itself into inevitable starvation. And honestly, for thousands of years of human history, he would have been right. Famine was nature's default population control.
But he was wrong. We defeated Malthus.
Because he didn't account for the exponential explosion in technology, and specifically in transport innovations.
Trains and boats.
Railroads and canals. They completely changed the definition of a market. Before the train, your market was basically whoever lived within a day's wagon ride. If you had a bumper crop, prices just crashed locally because you couldn't sell it anywhere else.
And if the next town over was starving, you couldn't even help them.
Exactly. Famines were often highly localized. You could literally have rotting food in one county and starvation in the next, simply because you couldn't move the heavy grain fast enough over dirt roads. The railroads smashed that barrier. Suddenly, the grain silos of the Midwest were connected directly to the hungry markets of the East Coast and eventually to Europe.
And canals did the same thing, right? Human-made waterways creating shipping routes where rivers didn't even exist, just speeding up delivery to these growing urban centers.
Exactly. So Malthus predicted we'd run out of food, but instead we just figured out how to ship it faster. We prevented those localized famines. We created a global food network and defeated the trap.
Okay, so this all sounds great. We beat starvation, we got incredibly efficient, we got rich. But we need to pivot here. We have to talk about the human cost. Because you don't rewrite the entire economic structure of the world without breaking some things.
And this is the part of the story that often gets glossed over in the textbooks. We talk about the paradox of efficiency. Efficiency is usually just a nice, sanitized word for people losing their jobs. Better farming tools meant fewer farmers were needed.
Right, and that leads to the rural to urban migration. Displaced rural workers didn't just disappear, they moved to the cities.
Right. To understand this, you have to look at how farming used to work. In the Middle Ages, there was a lot of common land. It wasn't owned by a corporation, it was shared. A peasant family might have a right to graze their cow on the village green, or farm a few strips of land here and there.
It wasn't super efficient, but it was a living. It kept people alive.
But when the rich landowners realized that these new machines, the seed drills and mechanical reapers, could make them a fortune, they realized something else. You can't use a seed drill on a tiny, weirdly shaped strip of shared land. You need a massive, open field.
You need scale.
You need scale. So they successfully lobbied the government to pass the Enclosure Acts. They literally allowed landowners to put fences and enclosures around the common land and claim it as private property.
So if I'm a peasant who's been grazing my sheep on that hill for 40 years, suddenly there's a fence and a sheriff telling me to beat it.
That is exactly what happened. It was essentially a mass eviction. Millions of people were kicked off the land their families had worked for centuries.
That is brutal. We talk about rural to urban migration like it was a fun lifestyle choice. Like, hey, honey, let's move to London. I hear the smog is lovely this time of year.
Not at all. It was forced displacement. These people had no economic value in the new, mechanized countryside. One guy with a reaper replaced 10 families. So where did they go?
They went to the cities.
And this is the crucial connection. This is the big aha moment of this whole era. What was happening in the cities at the exact same time?
The factories were opening. The Industrial Revolution.
Exactly. Those factories needed armies of cheap labor. The Enclosure Acts and the Agricultural Revolution provided the industrial labor supply.
Wow. So the suffering of the displaced farmer was basically the fuel for the industrial machine. The revolution on the farm literally fueled the revolution in the city.
100%. If the farms had stayed inefficient, everyone would have stayed in the village. The factories would have been totally empty. The modern industrial city was built on the backs of the farmers who lost their land.
That is a heavy realization. The efficiency we enjoy today, the fact that I can go buy a loaf of bread for a couple of bucks, is built on that historical displacement.
It is, and it wasn't a pretty transition. The early industrial cities were hellscapes. Overcrowded, diseased, polluted. These people went from open air to the slums of Manchester and London.
But, and I know this is complicated, but looking at the long-term demographics and health, the population didn't collapse. It boomed.
It skyrocketed. And that's the paradox. The quality of life for the displaced worker was often terrible, but their survival rate went up.
Because food was cheaper and more abundant?
Cheaper, more abundant, and more nutritious. Remember those turnips and the clover? That meant more meat and dairy. And we also have the diffusion of new food types from the Columbian Exchange, bringing potatoes and corn to Europe. People were getting way more calories.
And better nutrition means better immune systems, so life expectancy increases.
Exactly. Fewer babies died, people lived longer. Geographers model this as the demographic transition model. We entered a phase where birth rates stayed high, but mortality rates, the death rates crashed. The result was a massive population spike that filled up those new cities.
It's such a complicated legacy to wrap your head around. On one hand, you have the misery of the slums and the total loss of a traditional way of life. On the other hand, you have the escape from the Malthusian trap and the literal foundation of modern society.
Well, that's history for you. It's rarely black and white. It's a massive trade-off. We essentially traded the autonomy of the peasant for the security of the supermarket.
And we are still living in that trade-off today.
Which brings me to the summary of this whole deep dive. When we recap this journey from the seed drill to the skyscraper-filled city, it's clear the second agricultural revolution laid the entire foundation for our modern global food system. I feel like I should be thanking a turnip every time I look at my smartphone.
You absolutely should. The final takeaway here is that this was a total transformation of society, not just a series of neat farm inventions. There's a phrase I like to use: the skyscraper stands on the shoulders of the seed drill.
I love that. Unpack it just a bit for me.
We tend to think of the city as the center of innovation. We think technology flows from the urban center out to the backwoods countryside. But the second agricultural revolution shows us it's actually the exact opposite.
The country built the city. The city is a luxury. You can only have architects, engineers, artists, and, well, deep dive hosts if you have a massive surplus of food. The agricultural breakthrough is the foundation. If that foundation cracks, the skyscraper falls.
It really highlights how invisible these systems are to us now. We just expect the grocery store shelves to be full. We don't see the 300 years of mechanical and biological engineering that makes it all possible.
And we forget how fragile it can be. We are relying on a system that requires massive inputs of energy, stable climates, and global transport networks.
Which leaves me with a final, slightly provocative thought for you to mull over. We usually think of industry building cities, but as we've discussed, without the turnips and the seed drills of the countryside, the modern industrial city would have starved before it ever began.
The invisible engine.
Right. So ask yourself this: how much of our current tech boom relies on similarly invisible foundational shifts? We marvel at artificial intelligence in the cloud, but what are the modern equivalents of the seed drill and the enclosure acts making it all possible behind the scenes? What invisible rural or global shifts are we ignoring today while we stare at our screens?
That is a very heavy, very real thought to end on.
Just something to think about next time you're wandering the produce aisle. Thanks for taking the deep dive with us.
Until next time.